Welcome back to Custerdome Productions and another installment of Steely Dan Mysteries, where I attempt to give an answer to long-standing questions surrounding their music. Today we look at three simple words that have sparked one of the fiercest debates in the entire community. What is the fine Colombian? Without further ado, let's jump straight into the mystery itself. Hey 19 is among Steely Dan's best-known work. The hit single off their final album for 20 years, Gaucho, the track follows a characteristically Dan-esque story of an older man attempting to seduce a younger woman, whom he cannot relate to, by filling in their lack of shared experience and interests with alcohol and drugs. Rather uncharacteristically, however, the lyrics of the song are quite unambiguous. It is not difficult to make out the meaning behind them. That is, except for one singular line. Towards the end of the song, the famous line, "The Cuervo Gold, the fine Colombian, make tonight a wonderful thing," is repeated. Cuervo Gold is not a mystery, it is a very real kind of tequila, and one can imagine that enough of it, combined with some fine Colombian, whatever it may be, would indeed make tonight a wonderful thing. No mystery there. But what is the fine Colombian? People not in the know may immediately assume it is a reference to cocaine, but there are a large group of fans who insist it is instead a reference to marijuana. Unlike the last installment in this series, I'm going to remain entirely neutral until the end, and instead explore both sides of the debate equally and fairly before making a conclusion. The two main arguments for the reference being to weed are that Colombia was at the time not known for cocaine, but instead marijuana, and that Becker explicitly stated that it was pot in live performances. So let's examine those. Whether or not Colombia was known for weed or cocaine when the song was written, as I will explore briefly later, is difficult to fully ascertain, but I think this is often overstated as an argument, not only because Fagen and Becker were never ones to follow the status quo, but because of a piece of evidence I will share in the next section. And anyway, the argument that Becker plainly states it is weed in live performances is, to me, much more important. Although Becker gave a great many of these speeches during the song's mid-section when performed live, and as such it is possible his drug of choice varied between sets, first-hand examples and accounts are seemingly unanimously in favour of it being weed. Without question, this is one of the strongest pieces of evidence for either side of the argument, and in some people's eyes would end the debate right there. In terms of the vibe of the song itself, and Gaucho as an album, it can really swing both ways depending on your own feelings. If you look at the characterization of the protagonist as an ex-college kid past his prime, and view his intentions as trying to have a mellow, relaxed evening with this girl, then weed makes sense. Whereas if you look at Gaucho's wider fascination with late 70s Los Angeles glamour, debauchery and excess, and see the wonderful thing in question as more of a wild party, then the argument for cocaine seems to be stronger. And on that note, let's examine said argument. When I put up a poll on Twitter a few months ago to gather a consensus on this topic for this video, the result ended surprisingly one-sided, almost a 70-30 split to cocaine. But regardless of the exact divide, it would definitely seem that it is the more popular, standard answer in general. And this makes sense. When people think of drugs from Colombia these days, they think of cocaine. But as has been pointed out already, when the song was written this was not necessarily the case. So what then is the argument for the fine Colombian being cocaine? Well, one piece of evidence I think is often overlooked is found in the following track on the album Glamour Profession. I think there is very little debate that the song is about a narcissistic cocaine dealer with delusions of grandeur. So when, in that song, he meets contact Jive Miguel from Bogota, the capital of Colombia, it seems as though regardless of if cocaine was a major export of the country at the time, the association was there for Fagen and Becker. Furthermore, historically speaking, Colombia was absolutely still a major cocaine exporter in the late 1970s. Evidence exists both ways for which it is best known for, and that combined with the Glamour Profession reference and the overall vibe of Gaucho as an album, makes a compelling case for the fine Colombian being cocaine. Coming into this video, I still held the belief that the fine Colombian was cocaine. To me, the minutiae of whether Colombia was the main producer of coke in the late 1970s was overshadowed by the overall aesthetic of the song and album, and by the line in Glamour Profession. But upon looking into the details, it seems to me that the substance in question being weed is equally, or perhaps more, likely. One simply cannot overlook the explicit characterization of it as weed in live renditions. But then again, to what extent do the intentions of the writer matter? Of course, if the question is purely about what Fagen and Becker intended for the phrase to allude to, it seems we have quite a definite answer. However, if the question is simply what the drug is, I think there is no reason to say it cannot be cocaine purely because it was not the original meaning. As I have discussed, there are different ways to interpret the actions and nature of the song's protagonist, and as such, one's own personal view of these factors would extend to what his drug of choice is. And so, ultimately, I believe that the answer to the question is that weed was the original meaning of the phrase, but either is the correct answer to the question, what is the fine Colombian? And with that, I'll see you next time.